Welcome to Contemporary. Welcome to Contemporary First Nation Voices, NBE 3C. This is grade 11 English, college level. This is Jillian Percy. Today is class 10, and we are working on key questions 15, 16, and maybe 17, depending on how fast things go. All right, here are all the ways to connect to me. The studio number is 1-800-465-7144. The office phone number is 1-800-667-3703, extension 2211. My email is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. My Facebook, capital G, capital P-E-R-C-Y, space, capital W-A-H-S-A. If you send me a message there, please do a friend request and a message. With the message, make sure to tell me what your name is and then what course you're taking. There's two different YouTube channels that you can watch the previous classes on. There's my teacher one, which is G. Percy Wassa, and the newest playlist will be this course, because this is the only course I'm teaching this term. And then there is a school channel, which is called Wassa Distance Education YouTube channel. And that one has all the different teachers, but it should also have the stuff from this course as well. By the way, I did not teach this course last year, but someone else did. However, there have been some changes, so I do not advise watching last year's version of the course because it will definitely have some significant differences, okay? How to hand in work. Okay, the easiest way is you can scan it and email it to me. If you don't have a scanner, you can give it to the DEC at your learning center and they can scan it and send it to me. You can also fax it in. Some people take pictures of it and either send the pictures through Facebook or send me the pictures through email. If you are handing in assignments by photograph, please make sure that your photograph is nice and clear so that your writing can be read and that you make the photograph big enough that I can read it, okay? If it's very tiny, I can't see it at all. Don't just hit the share button on your phone. The picture comes up at a very strange size because it's meant to go to another phone and I'm on a computer instead. It's kind of hard to shrink down. Instead, if you save the photo to your phone or your computer, whatever you're using, and then write me an email and send the photo along as an attachment, it just works so much better. Whenever you hand in work, always send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. That's our database where all the assignments go. You can include me in the email if you want to, but when this happens, the secretary can log that you submitted the work. It goes into our database that it's been submitted. And then if it needed to be retrieved at some point, because like I got sick or next year you didn't finish the course, something like that, it can easily be found. Whereas if it just goes to my email, it's not as easy to find for other people, right? Please include your full name, your course name, your assignment number, and your name on the page of the assignment, not just in the email, okay? Because I don't see the email usually. I just get the printed off copy, so I need to know who it's from and all that kind of good stuff. If an assignment asks for both a rough and a good draft, please label which one is which and include them both in the same email. If you do multiple rough drafts, I know I have some students do that, kind of do like, okay, this is, rough draft number 1 out of 3. This is rough draft number 2 out of 3. That way I just kind of know your process and see where you started at and where you kind of went to. And then usually I use the kind of the best one to mark if I'm actually giving marks for that. But it just kind of helps me when I'm looking at things. If you could do that, that'd be great. Okay, so we are in week 3. And remember that this week, it's a kind of a short week because we had Monday off for family holiday. Today, we are going to be looking at 15 and 16 and maybe 17, depending on how fast it is. If it's not, we'll end up doing that tomorrow. And then tomorrow, hopefully 17, 18, and I think there's like maybe 19. We'll finish up the unit 1, I think. And then there's no class on Friday. So we're only 3 classes this week instead of 4 classes like normal. All right, for this unit especially, I definitely made some changes. There are some courses, some assignments I eliminated, there's some I added. So the numbers that I'm showing may not match your originals. You're welcome to hand in the originals that you have or the revised version until the end of the school year. However, I strongly suggest that you call me and get the revised version instead, okay? I've made it different on purpose. Usually it's easier, clearer to understand, or it better meets the expectations that the government has laid out, all right? Okay, so we are on lesson 5. This is the last lesson, but not the last assignment of the unit 1. Oh, we did that already. Sorry, hang on a sec. Okay, so talking about sentences. People sometimes think of each sentence being its own creation, but actually sentences tend to follow 4 basic patterns in English. There's a simple sentence, a compound sentence, a complex sentence, and oh, looks like it disappeared on me. Hang on a second. Sorry here. Sometimes things don't save the way I want them to. Oh, not all caps. I don't want that. Complex compound sentence. Sorry, kind of a mouthful there. Okay, simple sentences. We talked earlier in the course about the basic or simple sentence pattern in English. It's when you simply have the subject and then the predicate. And this sentence must express a complete thought on its own. A phrase like John is, even though it has a subject and a verb, doesn't count as a complete sentence because it's incomplete thought. And it doesn't make any sense. John is what? A very short example that would work would be like dogs run. Dogs is your subject, run is your predicate. A longer example that's still following the exact same pattern is the tall golden trees swayed in the autumn wind. So simple doesn't necessarily mean short. It means it's not complicated. It's following that simple pattern of there's a subject and then there's a predicate that has the verb. Okay. Now, a slightly more complicated version of a simple sentence uses an introductory phrase at the beginning, and this phrase may describe the time, the place, the manner, or the reason for the action in the sentence. And often we're putting it at the front to kind of emphasize that concept or to kind of describe the entire sentence rather than just the action. But it does shift the subject away from being the first part of the sentence, which can sometimes confuse people. So here are some examples of that. In the park, comma, the dogs ran freely. So now the dogs comes right after the introductory phrase. At 2:15, I have an appointment. I is the subject and it's coming right after the introductory phrase. Slowly, a man walked up the stairs with his cane. Slowly is my introductory phrase, and then a man is my subject. Due to rain, comma, the team picnic is canceled. Okay, so it could be one word, 2 words, it could be a phrase. The subject still is coming at the beginning of the main part of the sentence, which is usually starts right after that comma for the introductory phrase. Okay, compound sentences. A compound sentence is when 2 simple sentences are joined together using a coordinating conjunction. Each of these 2 simple sentences must express a complete thought. This is sometimes called an independent clause because it can stand all its own, because it expresses a complete thought. When we do this, a comma replaces the period at the end of the first sentence. Here's an example. If I have 2 simple sentences like, she loves cats, period, she hates dogs, period, I can turn that into one compound sentence. For example, she loves cats, comma, but she hates dogs. There are 7 coordinating conjunctions that are used to join simple sentences together. Or and nor, but or yet, and so. These conjunctions have slightly different meaning and they cannot be used interchangeably. And is probably the most neutral joiner. You can join almost any 2 sentences together with that one. The words but or yet tend to imply the idea of contrast, like I want to come, but I have to work. Or that's a word that implies choice. We are going to watch a movie, or we might play laser tag. Nor implies a negative choice, like 2 things that you don't want. I don't want to eat pizza, nor do I want to eat spaghetti. For and so are reasoning words. They imply that you're giving a reason or sort of stating the effect that you're hoping for. The word for can sound a little bit more formal, so I feel like it's not used as often as it used to be. So is a little bit more common, I think. I am making supper early, so we have time to get to the movie. I am cleaning up the basement, for I want to create a playroom. Either one of those is correct, okay? Complex. A complex sentence is when an independent clause or a simple sentence is joined to a dependent clause. A dependent clause is considered an incomplete sentence that could not stand on its own, even though it does have a subject and a verb. A dependent clause is also called a subordinate clause. And the reason for that is because complex sentences are joined together using subordinate conjunctions. There are a lot of subordinate conjunctions, and just like with any other type of conjunction, they suggest different types of relationships between the two sentences. The subordinate clause will always start with a subordinate conjunction. It can come at the beginning of the sentence or at the end. And I didn't list here, I forget sometimes that not everyone's taking the same courses. Probably maybe next day, tomorrow, I'll try and include a little chart on subordinate clauses. It can imply, let me see here, it can suggest relationships of time, reason, sequence, what else? Comparison, contrast, place, and I'm sure there's some more, but that's how you are joining the two sentences together. Here are some examples. Now, the independent clause can come first, or the dependent clause can come first. So I'm doing both so you can see that. When the independent clause comes first, you don't usually need a comma at the end of it to divide them, because that's kind of how the normal sentence would work. So for example, I'm going to the coffee shop because I have a date meeting me there. Now, I did put the comma because I'm just kind of used to seeing it there, but it isn't necessary. She is doing the laundry while her husband does a garbage run. And again, you don't really need a comma there at all. I am picking up Sandra whenever she finishes up her shift at work. So I'm just going to kind of, I see it. There we go. I'm going to outline it there. So I'm going to the coffee shop is my main clause. It can stand on its own. Because I have a date meeting me there is a subordinate clause. It can't stand on its own because it wouldn't make any sense without the rest of the sentence. While her husband does a garbage run, that is my subordinate clause, and it starts with a subordinate conjunction. And same thing here. Whenever she finishes up her shift at work, an entire subordinate clause starts with a subordinate conjunction. Now, I can put it first, especially if I want to put emphasis on it. Like, after I finish work, comma, I am going to a gym. Now, because I'm messing up the normal order of a sentence when I do this, I do put a comma so that people can kind of notice that I'm changing the order of the sentence. Since you got here early, comma, we could leave right away. Because you love concerts, comma, I got us some tickets to a show on the weekend. Before we go outside, comma, we need to shut the lights off. So for each one of these that I've underlined, those are the dependent clauses, and they all start with a subordinate conjunction. So that's kind of your clue. Okay. So compound complex sentence is a little bit more complicated. Basically, it has two independent clauses and one or more dependent clauses. These can get a bit complicated. I wouldn't suggest deliberately trying to write this way, but it is the one more sentence pattern, and I just kind of want you to be aware of it, okay? It allows you to combine sentences in a way that you're able to show much more complicated relationships, and the dependent clause or clauses can go at any place in the sentence. That makes sense. So for example, usually I work out in the mornings before I eat breakfast, but today I was too hungry to wait. So this part here, before I eat breakfast, is my dependent clause. Usually I work out in the mornings is independent, and then today I was too hungry to wait is independent, and we join it with a coordinating conjunction. Even though Dad was angry, he didn't yell at us, and he explained what we did wrong. So here the dependent clause came in the front, and then there are two independent clauses. Sorry, those words are so close, I keep getting a word that I'm mixing them up. I get scared easily, comma, so I don't watch horror movies, before I go to bed. Now, before I go to bed is my subordinate clause. I get scared easily, and so I don't watch horror movies. That part would be a compound sentence if it was all by itself, because it's just two simple sentences or two independent clauses joined together. Although I wanted to win, I hurt my foot while I was racing, so I had to stop. So this one has two dependent clauses. Although I wanted to win is my first dependent clause. And then while I was racing is my second dependent clause. And then there's two independent clauses. Okay, so that's kind of a complicated one. Like I'm saying, you don't need to use it, but I do find like it just, if you talk, that's tends to be how we do talk. So it is a legitimate sentence form. I don't want people to worry that that doesn't count, okay? So the reason why I'm going over all this sentence information is because the single most common grammar mistake I see in any writing is sentences that do not have a subject. And while many grammar errors are considered minor and unimportant and aren't going to affect your marks much, if you consistently leave out the subject, it can make it very difficult for me to understand the ideas you're trying to express, and that can have a big effect on your marks. Sometimes students get confused and think that every noun and pronoun in a sentence counts as a subject, but that is incorrect. The subject is only the noun or pronoun that is doing the action or being described. So here are some examples. I have the angry cow charged the fence and it knocked over a pole. In this sentence, there's two clauses, right? The angry cow charged the fence is my one clause. I'm gonna italicize it just so you can kind of tell. I don't want to underline it because I've been using that to indicate that it's dependent. And here's my second one. It knocked over a pole. And then it's joined by this conjunction. I'm just going to give it a different color just to kind of make life easy for right now. Okay. Now, the angry cow charged the fence is the first clause. Cow and fence are both nouns, but the cow is the only one doing the action, okay? So the cow is my subject, and generally we take all the words that are describing the cow. So the angry cow, that is my complete subject. Fence doesn't count as my subject at all. It's not doing anything. For my second clause, it knocked over a pole. It and pole count as noun pronouns, but the pole isn't doing anything. The it, which is referring to the cow, it's doing something. So it is my subject. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because we're using more complicated sentence patterns, there's two subjects. There's one subject for the first sentence over here, and then there's a second subject for the second sentence or the second part of this bigger sentence, okay? Sometimes what's happening is people will remember the subject in the first one and then forget to do a subject in the second one, okay? So whenever you're using a conjunction, whether it's a coordinate or a subordinate conjunction, make sure both sides have their own subject, okay? All right, so this is a support question. That just means we're using it to practice this idea, but we're not necessarily having to count it for marks, right? It's just an idea to help you figure it out. All right, let me grab my pen here. Okay, so what type of sentence is this? Mom and dad have a big argument every summer over where they should spend their summer. Okay, so mom and dad have a big argument every summer. Could be a sentence all by itself. And then where they should spend their Christmas vacation is dependent. So it's got an independent and a dependent. That means, oh, let me do it. It's a complex sentence. Woohoo. Let's see if it'll let me do that on the next one too. All right, okay. My son loves to go to the beach, so he can go swimming. Well, so is one of our coordinate conjunctions. And there's an independent clause on this side and an independent clause on that side. That means it's a compound sentence. Before I can go home for the weekend, I have to finish the sales report, and I have to total up my time card. So this is a dependent clause. This one is an independent clause. And then there's a second independent clause. So I've got 3 clauses. That's a good sign that I've got a compound complex sentence here. A fish fry has several steps: making a fire, cooking up potatoes, and frying up some fish. And this is a very long sentence, but it's actually still just a simple sentence. Okay? I'm telling you all the steps in making a fish fry. It's just one sentence though. Okay? My Gookum dislikes sitting on the beach because she always gets a nasty sunburn. Okay, so because is a subordinate conjunction, okay, which means this is probably a complex sentence. And if I wanted to verify, I've got a dependent clause, sorry, an independent clause here, and then this one is considered an dependent clause because it starts with the word because, okay? Now, part B is we're still looking at sentences and thinking about what type they are. But here we're mostly going to focus on identifying the clauses and then in each clause finding the subject. So barking all the way, the dog ran home. This is not a clause, okay? That's just an introductory phrase. This is my only clause, okay? And dog is my only subject. So I would put dog here, okay? That year was the worst because we moved to a city. So there's 2 clauses. There's one on this side, and then there's one on this side because moved to a new city. And then if I wanted to figure out the subject, okay, year is my subject here. And then for the other one, we is my other subject. City does not count as a subject because it's not doing anything. It's not moving. The we is moving, not the city. After a long day in the sun, John wanted to go swimming, but he was too tired. Okay, I don't know if you can see it, but there is, after a long day in the sun is not a clause because there's no verb and there's no subject to doing anything. It's an introductory phrase, so I'm not worrying about that. John wanted to go swimming is a clause. And he was too tired is a clause. And there's my coordinating conjunction. The moment you see that, it's a good guess that you got 2 simple sentences. Here's my subject he, here's my subject John. And so I put that John and we. Okay. Although the couple is 250 miles apart, they keep in constant contact on the internet. So here, although is a subordinate conjunction. And so it's creating, oh, I didn't want it to do that. It invented its own thing to do there. Okay, so that whole thing is a clause. The couple is my subject in the first one, okay? And then they keep in constant contact is my second clause. And who's doing the action? They are. So I know it's a bit thick for some reason. Maybe I can make it a bit thinner. It's kind of covering up some of my stuff. Hang on a sec. There. I'm gonna make it a little bit transparent to make things easier, I think. Oh, not quite that. Too transparent. Sorry, guys. What about this? Okay. I will plant the garden wherever you want me to. All right, there's 2 clauses here. I will plant the garden. Oh, that's really too dark, isn't it? Not dark enough and not quite enough. Wait. I will plant the garden wherever you want me to. Okay, in the first sentence, I is doing the planting. That's my first one. And then wherever you want me to, you is doing the action in the second part. Okay, so This is not something you need to know by heart, but it is a good idea to know how to check to find your own subjects because it is such a common error. If you find me writing on your assignments missing subjects or incomplete sentences, that's almost always the problem there, okay? All right, let's look at the next bit here. Okay, key question number 15, different perspectives on names. In lesson 1, we discussed the variety of different names that may be applied to Indigenous people and what they mean. Sometimes this can be tricky as to what words are considered appropriate or preferred can change over the course of time. And it also may change depending on the situation or even just the individual. It might be inappropriate for non-Indigenous people to refer to First Nations people as Indian, but Indigenous people may use the word themselves, especially if they're discussing issues of status in reference to the controversial law called the Indian Act. In the following articles, opinions, and songs, we're going to be looking at different opinions on different names and how they're explained or express their opinion. Please read and discuss the use of the word in the text and then explain your opinion on the text. Please be sure to use evidence from the text or make connections to your own life to explain your ideas. The rubric for answering questions will be used to mark this. Answers that provide more relevant details, examples, and explanations will get higher marks than those that do not, okay? All right. So part A is this article on the author's use of the word Indian and explain his stance on the word and his reasons for using it, and then discuss whether you agree with him or don't agree with him. Now I'm going to go there. There's a link in your unit, and here's what it says. This is from the Carletonian from Wednesday, February 19th, 20. This isn't just from today. Okay, yeah. This is from about last year around February. This is by Baxmeyer. My great-grandma attended a boarding school. The history of the United States boarding schools in the United States is a legacy of cultural genocide. My great-grandmother was never the same after her experience with a school that tried to tame the, quote, wild Indian, quote, inside of her. In the last 3 weeks, since I published my first piece on Indian country and tribal sovereignty, I've received a significant amount of feedback and questions regarding my use of the word Indian. For many people at Carleton, that term seems pejorative and downright offensive. Many have commented that the term Indian is a misnomer, a relic of Columbian exploitation. I'll admit that when I got to Carleton, I was a little surprised that there was this much stigma surrounding a word that I had heard used in my family and my tribe my whole life. Questions about my use of the term have even morphed into criticism. As one person asked me, why use Indian when Indigenous conveys the exact same message without the problematic name? I do not use the word Indigenous when I'm referring to American Indians or Alaska Natives, and I think it's high time I explain why. I want to state that this piece is not a larger thesis on what indigeneity, sorry, I'm having trouble saying that word, indigeneity means. Scholars such as Noam Chomsky have been providing these takes from an outdated and problematic perspective for decades. I argue that Indian is not only the right term for what I'm talking about, but also that Indigenous is harmful to the arguments that I'm making. I will be using the word Indian throughout this piece, but it should always be inferred that I am referring to American Indians and Alaska Natives, along with Pacific Islanders, living on their homelands that are occupied by the United States. So this is an American one, but I thought it still was relevant to our conversation. I should note that the Western Lens Indian, as it pertains to American Indians, is indeed a misnomer. When the Spanish arrived in what we now call the Americas, they believed they had reached India. Therefore, the people who lived there were denoted as Indians, and this term stuck for centuries. From the Indian Removal Act to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Western people utilized the term Indian to label us. It doesn't take a long or extensive knowledge of history to know why the Western world wanted to create a category for the people indigenous to the newly occupied land. The US, Mexican, and Canadian governments needed a term to describe the people that they didn't want. The term Indian was a demographic marker for extermination, a marker to signify a government's undesirables. This term, however problematic, was unique to us. There were no American Indians indigenous to Africa. There were no American Indians unique to Australia. American Indian was a clear and concise term to categorize a population. By the way, I want to point out that doesn't mean that there aren't indigenous people in Australia. He's talking about the fact that there's a lot of specific laws and things designating the term Indian in American legal and society that are referring to a specific people, not to every indigenous person in every land. Eventually, the West realized that colonization meant displacing these populations. In an attempt to coagulate this category, the term indigenous grew in popularity. Indigenous simply described whatever and whoever they wanted to. Despite this rise among non-Indians, American Indians in the 1960s and 70s came to reclaim the term that used to be a mark of undesirability. Grassroots Indian-led campaigns in the United States, such as the American Indian Movement, started reclaiming this name to make it ours. Indian was reclaimed to convey a message of universal struggle. Through the Mashpee Wampanoag of Massachusetts and the Hopi people of Arizona have as much in common with each other as two people from Portugal and Poland do, the term American Indians serves as a common marker. Even if two native nations from across the country have almost nothing in common culturally, religiously, or individually, they both reside in a country that wanted to exterminate them. It then becomes necessary to find a term that fits the people who live in a country that occupies their land. This is not to say that Indigenous is never correct. It has its place in everyday parlance, but it hardly conveys the point that people who are referring to Indians want to make. Every American Indian, by definition, is indigenous to the Americas, and therefore Indigenous is an overarching term that when referring to a plethora of Indigenous folk from across the globe is never incorrect. But it's when Indigenous becomes the catch-all term to replace American Indian that I start to worry. Indigenous in its own way is just a sign of otherness. It's a concept rooted in purposely describing everyone that isn't white. Because of that, it's incredibly broad to the degree that it becomes practically meaningless in many theories of indigeneity. In this same way, the American Indians are indigenous to the Americas, the Aboriginals are indigenous to Australia, and the Sayan are indigenous to Southern Africa. As is such, the language that academics and policymakers use regarding the people they're talking about matters. If Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland started using Indigenous as the catch-all term for American Indians and Alaska Natives, it would become unclear whether she was referring to the American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Pacific Islanders who share the same geography as the United States, to Canadian American Indians who live in diaspora in the United States, or to countless other groups that fit under the UN's definition of indigeneity. This issue becomes especially important when talking about treaty rights. The Hopi have a treaty with federal government and with Arizona, but the Samburu of East Africa do not. It is to avoid this confusion and, to be more specific, that I personally choose to use the word Indian. I don't want this message to be muddled. Indian is a very loaded term for many people, including many American Indians. It brings back memories of the boarding schools and of acts of genocide. Who am I, a pasty-skinned man who happens to be tribally enrolled, to say that there's only one right way to describe a group of diverse people? And the truth is that I'm no one. I shouldn't be the reason that someone uses a term. But I will gladly tell you why I use it. My great-grandmother didn't talk much about being American Indian in a school that was there to erase her culture. One thing she did say routinely is that she was an Indian and that she suffered for it. If honoring her memory and remembering her suffering means using a term deemed unusable by my non-Indian peers, then I will do so without remorse. Okay, so explain his stance on the word and his reasons for using it, and then discuss whether you agree with him. Do you think he's right? Do you not think he's right? What are your reasons for that? Okay, this is a different article. That's we're kind of comparing ideas. And I know the articles are a little bit long, but I'm not asking you a lot of details. I just kind of want you to get the gist of it. This is one about some teenagers, and they're expressing their opinion. This is specifically from the Canadian side, and their opinion on the use of the word Indian. How and why is their opinion different from the first article? And again, what is your own opinion on the word? Okay, I probably won't get to read all this because I don't want to take up all my time. Ooh, look at the time. But we will talk about it. The title is, oops, hang on. We Aren't Indians. Indigenous Teens Say Words Matter. Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and other organizations are rapidly replacing Indian with Indigenous. Now, this was written in 2017, so it's about 6 years earlier than the other article, just so you kind of keep that in mind when you're reading it, okay? And there is a little video you can watch if you want to see the video too. 19-year-old Cassidy Harper feels only one emotion when she hears the word Indian. Anger, Harper said. We aren't Indians. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, the Saskatchewan Indigenous Culture Center, and other bodies have recently purged Indian from their names. Harper and other Natanana collegiate students interviewed by CBC News say that change is welcome. For Harper, a member of the Moosomin First Nation, the word Indian is a symbol of shame. Her father, grandmother, and others have been subjected to repeated slurs using the word. She said it has been used to stereotype them as savages. Harper is saddened that the shaming continues. Last week, she began to braid the hair of her niece, and the little girl told her to stop, fearing that it would make her look, quote, too Indian, unquote. She doesn't like her skin color because some of the kids at school make fun of her for it. She's only 7, Harper said. I am what I am. Harper is studying to become a social worker to help Indigenous people heal the wounds of residential school and other oppression. Terminology and identity are central to that effort. My identity is Cree. I'm very proud of my nation and my culture, she said. I also prefer the words First Nations or Indigenous. I don't really like Aboriginal. It's like abnormal, like we're a fungus or something. Fellow Natana students Kayla Fiddler and Caitlin Works have also spent a lot of time thinking about issues of appearance, terminology, and identity. There's been racism, because when I tell people I'm Métis, they are always kind of taken aback, like, oh, you can't be Métis, you're too fair, your eyes are blue, said Works, who hopes to become a conservation officer. And I'm not sure how I'm supposed to look. I can't really change my appearance. I am what I am. Fiddler, a fashion model who wants to become a psychologist, is also Métis. However, I'm also Puerto Rican and Jamaican and Cuban on my mom's side, and then I'm Irish and I'm Norwegian and English and French. I'm a little bit of everything. All three feel Indian is an offensive term, and they also note it's historically inaccurate. Okay, so there is a little bit more there. I'm not going to read everything, but this is kind of the discussion from the Canadian Indigenous teens. And I find myself wondering, is there a difference between how Americans feel about the word compared to how Canadians feel about the word? I don't know. All right, part C. Here's an article on an airline's use of the word Eskimo, and then read it and discuss the difference of opinion in the article over the use of the word Eskimo. Hi, that's weird. I had a little, no. Oh, okay. Sorry, there was a little tiny excerpt that I had kind of right there to use, but it seems to have disappeared. Hang on. So I think we're not going to get through as much of today as I thought. Hang on a second. Okay, so now the point for this one too, you can listen to this as well. This was from February 5th, 2016. Alaska natives discuss what Eskimo means to them. And it is in response to this ad. So here's an American airline, and they've got kind of an image of an Alaskan native on the plane, and their ad says, "Meet our Eskimo. He's a warm, welcoming presence and a constant reminder of our commitment to our flyers. Learn the story of the face on the tail." It's on the tail of the plane. Okay. So then here's kind of part of the story. After Alaska Airlines unveiled a new look for their airplanes and website, many Alaska natives took offense to a phrase with their new marketing campaign. The phrase that sparked a controversy and a new round of conversations about what the word Eskimo means to Alaska natives. Alaska Airlines unveiled their new airplane and website designs late last month. Both prominently feature the familiar face of a smiling Alaska Native elder. The website also included the phrase "Meet our Eskimo," which was quickly changed to "Meet the Eskimo." But does that change go far enough? I would rather be called Inupiaq, because that's what I am, and my children are Yupik. Blossom Twitchell from Kotzebue said, I want them to be able to connect to their culture, and people won't group us in as little people that live in igloos and give little Eskimo kisses all the time. We are so much more than that. We have culture and traditions that have been passed down for generations, and I don't believe the word Eskimo does our heritage justice. After the Alaska Airlines redesign incident, Twitchell decided to take a step further by starting a petition asking the Bureau of Indian Affairs to stop identifying people's ethnicity as Eskimo in federal paperwork. As of Thursday afternoon, the petition had over 50 supporters. Much like the familiar face and the tail of the Alaska airline planes, no one seems to have a definitive answer on where the word Eskimo came from. An article by University of Alaska Fairbanks linguist Lawrence Kaplan said the word's original origin means eater of raw meat and might have been given to the Inupiaq people by Western explorers. The article also says that the Canadian version of the word might have come from an Ojibwe word meaning netter of horseshoes. The word isn't used much in Canada as it's considered offensive by many Inuit in the country. But Alaska natives say they've been using the word for a while. Nels Alexi is a Yupik elder from Bethel. In my first memories, we used Eskimo when referring to ourselves or each other. Then along the way, we started using the word Yupik to describe ourselves, Alexi said. Alexi is like many Yupiks interviewed for this story that are accustomed to the term and have no firm position on whether it's appropriate or not. Other Yupik elders, however, don't like the term. Dr. Teresa John is an associate professor for Indigenous Studies at UAF. If we stop using the names other people give us, they will understand. Our ancestors were proud to be Yupik and were strengthened by their way of life. They wanted us, their descendants, to keep our tradition alive, not to act like it's not there, but to understand it and to live it, John said. John also added the word Eskimo isn't part of the Yupik language or originally any of the native languages in Alaska. Tiffany Zalosky from Anchorage and the former mayor of Bethel sent a letter to Alaska Airlines expressing her disappointment about their website statements and invited them to participate in the Racial Equity Summit sponsored by the First Alaskans Institute. Airlines CEO Brad Tilden released a statement apologizing on behalf of the company for the insensitive reference. The airline ultimately changed their website greeting, completely removing the word Eskimo, and stated that they are looking forward to working together with the Alaska Native community to ensure that their actions reflect their respect for all Alaska Natives and Alaskans alike. Like most Native languages in Alaska, the words Yupik and Inupiaq both mean real person. They also represent languages, by the way. But what the word Eskimo is not so clear-cut and means different things to different people. Okay, so what is the difference of opinion in the article over the use of the word Eskimo? I'm being a bit vague there. I'm asking you to please give me as many details as possible to explain why there's disagreement and how it started and all that kind of stuff, okay? This is the last one for this question. This is a video of a song from the 1972, which uses the word Eskimo. I'm not going to go to it right now because YouTube is very fussy about music being played. But if you could listen to the song, how do you feel about the use of the word and the overall images in the song? Explain why you feel this way, okay? Let me see here. Okay, so that's a lot of writing. I'm going to be using the rubric for answering questions that we've used before, where I'm just kind of looking at your overall ability to answer questions. So I'm looking at how detailed you get. I'm looking at how well you explain your ideas. I'm looking at whether you give evidence from the text or whether you make connections. Both of those are acceptable. If it's asking you explain what the article says, then make sure you use examples from the article. If it says explain why you feel this way, then make sure you explain examples from your own life, okay? It just depends on what the question is saying. Um, the big thing I was trying to kind of discuss here is that sometimes people want to kind of go, okay, that word is never okay, or this word is always okay. And as you can see just from the tiny little bit we've read, and there's lots more articles on this issue online, by the way, there's a lot of different controversy about what words are okay and what words are not okay. And I find myself looking at it and thinking about, like, does it matter what country you're from? Does it matter how old you are? Um, does it matter how the word's been used previously? Has it been used more neutrally? Has it been used more as a slur? Why? How does that affect things, right? Um, so this is kind of one of those big things that's kind of a part of the course, which we will come back to later. There is kind of stuff to go on to. I'm just going to kind of do a tiny little bit of it, but I won't get all the way to it. Cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. One issue that's caused a lot of confusion and disagreement is the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. Some people would define each of these phrases differently. Appreciation is generally thought of as showing that you value, admire, or enjoy aspects of another culture in a way that is respectful of the boundaries and permissions that the other culture requests. That's the big issue. Many times, non-Indigenous cultures may feel they're showing appreciation when it's perceived as appropriation by Indigenous people. Read the article below to understand these concepts better. Okay, so I'm going to put out, hang on. This is only part of the article. It's a very long article, and I did not have room to include all of it. You are definitely welcome to follow the link that I include and read the whole article. Again, if you're out there in Radio Land, there's a little picture here of 3 faces wearing ethnic costumes from different cultures. One looks like it would be East Indian, like originally from the land of India. The other one is Asian of some sort, and the other one I think is intended to be showing Black American culture, I would say. And on their faces, they have culture, not costume. Cultural appropriation is a subject that's been the subject of much debate in recent years. It involves individuals or groups from a dominant culture borrowing or taking elements from a culture of people who have been historically oppressed or marginalized. Understanding this concept is crucial in recognizing why certain cultural exchanges might be harmful or offensive. These are just a few examples of cultural appropriation. So here is an example of a Victoria's Secret model in 2012. I'm kind of surprised it's so recent, but anyways, she is wearing a Native American headdress, turquoise jewelry, and basically a bikini. There was, not surprisingly, an uproar over it, and they had to make some apologies and remove it. But clearly they were unaware that that would be offensive to people, but I don't know why, because that one seems really obvious to me. Here's a different one. The Lowe's Spring Summer 2018 collection was called out for cultural appropriation because they had a lot of textiles that were using patterns traditionally made by Ecuador's indigenous craftspeople. The image was almost identical to those produced by Otavalo weavers, but no credit was given to them. Having said that, after there was an issue about it, the creative director left a comment clarifying that the blanket and the tote are in fact made in Ecuador. So here they were they are using or employing people from Ecuador to make the product, but it's still benefiting a company that is more or less non-Indigenous, and they did not originally give credit. People just kind of noticed, hey, there's an awful lot of similarities between these and what we see. So that was kind of another one, example of cultural appropriation. Okay. Because of the time, I'm going to stop here. I'm just going to add a little heart real quick so that I remember. Otherwise, I tend to forget. There we go. We'll be talking more about appropriation and appreciation tomorrow, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on the matter. Thank you so much, and good luck with the assignments. Give me a phone call if you need help with anything.